On Election Day in 1920, a black property owner named Mose Norman tried to vote in Ocoee, Florida. By the next morning, a white mob had burned more than 20 black homes, 2 churches, and a fraternal lodge. Julius July Perry had been lynched. The attack and continued threats drove almost the entire black community away. Ocoee was not an all-black town. It was a racially mixed citrus-growing community, about 10 miles west of Orlando. The 1920 census counted 255 black residents and 560 white residents. Black families had lived, worked, farmed, worshipped, and owned property there for decades. Perry was a church deacon, labor leader, and lodge member. Norman owned and worked a 100-acre family orange grove. He belonged to the lodge and was among Ocoee's first automobile owners. These men were not outsiders. They were established members of the community. The presidential election of 1920 was the first general election after ratification of the 19th Amendment, which prohibited denying the vote on account of sex. But in the Jim Crow South, restrictions and racial violence still blocked many black women and men from the ballot. Republican organizers worked with black residents in Florida to assert their voting rights. White supremacists responded with intimidation. The Ku Klux Klan marched in Jacksonville and Orlando. Florida's Klan leader threatened a Republican organizer who taught black residents about citizenship and their rights. Former Judge John Chaney reported a warning that there would be serious trouble if black residents of Ocoee tried to vote. On November 2nd, Norman went to the polls. Election officials told him he had not paid his poll tax. Norman went to Orlando to consult Chaney, then returned and was refused again. Surviving accounts conflict over some details, including the precise reason officials gave and what happened during Norman's attempts. What is clear is that he tried to cast a ballot and was denied. Later, Orange County Sheriff's Deputy Clyde Pounds deputized members of a white posse to arrest Norman and Perry. Norman had fled. The posse went to Perry's home, where he was with his wife, Estelle, and their 19-year-old daughter, Caretha. Gunfire erupted. The record does not conclusively establish who fired first. 2 posse members were killed, several white men were wounded, and Perry and Caretha were wounded. The posse withdrew, and armed reinforcements arrived from Orlando and elsewhere in Orange County. Perry was captured in a sugarcane patch, treated at an Orlando hospital, and placed in the custody of the Orange County Sheriff's Office. A white mob took him, hanged him, and shot him. His body was left hanging in Orlando. Back in Ocoee, the violence spread through the northern black neighborhood. Through the night, white attackers burned more than 20 homes, 2 churches, and Ocoee Lodge 66. Black residents in other parts of the community were threatened and driven out. The surviving record cannot establish how many black people were killed. Reported estimates range from 3 to nearly 60. Evidence collected in a later Florida review included new cemetery graves and a record of 3 burned victims buried together, but it did not yield a final count. That uncertainty is part of the history. The record preserved no complete accounting of the black lives lost. The displacement is clearer. The 1920 census counted 255 black residents. The 1930 census counted only 2. Over the same decade, the white population grew from 560 to 1,180. Florida's Office of Program Policy Analysis and Government Accountability estimates that at least 253 black people were displaced, possibly more. Black residents did not begin returning to live in Ocoee until the 1970s. Threats continued after the fires. In July 1921, a mob removed former Ocoee resident George Betsy from police custody, beat him, and chained him to a post because he had spoken about the violence. Then there was the land. Within 2 weeks of the massacre, newspaper advertisements offered Ocoee groves and groveland for sale. Deeds show property formerly owned by black residents passing to new owners from late 1920 through 1925. The surviving records do not consistently show whether families were paid or received fair value. But threats and expulsion make it impossible to treat these transfers as ordinary voluntary sales. July Perry's estate reveals how dispossession could continue through legal paperwork. A court appointed a white administrator to manage his property. 3 years later, Perry's family petitioned to recover the estate and said they had not been compensated. The court ordered an accounting, but the administrator's guardian did not comply, and the surviving record shows no further court action. An amended deed also said that the property could not be sold or transferred to a black person. The violence did more than suppress votes for one day. It expelled black citizens, dismantled their institutions, and opened land they had owned to transfer into white hands. The NAACP sent investigator Walter White to gather evidence. Federal officials and an Orange County grand jury also investigated. The federal inquiry was narrowly confined to election law violations and concluded there had been no interference with qualified black voters, a finding at odds with the broader evidence in the state's later review. No one was prosecuted for Perry's lynching, the Election Day killings, or the mass burning. For decades, the massacre was often described as a race riot, language that can suggest two equal groups losing control. But the outcome was profoundly one-sided. Ocoee's black community was destroyed. Almost its entire black population was forced out, and property changed hands in the aftermath. Public recognition came much later. Ocoee issued a remembrance proclamation in 2018. During the 2020 centennial, the city held commemorative events, presented a formal apology, and unveiled a historical marker. Florida also directed its African American History Task Force to develop ways to include Ocoee in required history instruction. Recognition cannot restore the ballots that were denied, the lives that were taken, or the property families lost. But accurate language matters. Ocoee was not a black town erased from a map. It was a mixed town whose black community was driven away. On November 2, 1920, Mose Norman tried to vote. By dawn, fire and mob violence had transformed Ocoee. In the years that followed, deeds, intimidation, and silence made that transformation endure. If overlooked history like this matters to you, please like this video and subscribe for more.